Now that we have our clouds and our sky darkening, let's go ahead and let's make it rain. In order to make it rain, I'm going to need to use an adjustment layer. With my solid layer, which is our background layer on our composition, I'm going to create an adjustment above that layer. We'll go to Layer, New, Adjustment Layer, and here's our adjustment layer. Remember that an adjustment layer is simply a null layer. It doesn't really do anything by itself, but you can apply effects to it that will affect all the underlying layers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my effects and preset. I'm going to search for rain, and there is an effect called CCC Rainfall. It's right down here. I'm going to drag this to the adjustment layer, and simply by putting that on there, you can see that we already have rain. So if we play our entire comp, you're going to see that there is some rain. It's a little bit easier to see once it gets darker, but there's definitely rain happening. And we only want the rain to basically start once our clouds fill in. So right about here. So with my adjustment layer, I'm just going to trim that layer by using Option left bracket. Then we'll have the rain start. And with this particular effect, you can control the amount of drops. So if we increase this, you can see that the rain can get quite dense, a lot more rain. But I think even if we just keep this number around 5,000, 6,000, that's going to be sufficient for what we want to do. You can control the size of the drops. So as we increase these, you can see that they're going to be a little bit more visible on the screen. I think I'll just go ahead and set these to be 5. We can control the speed of the rain, so how fast we want the rain to drop. If we bring this number way down, you'll see that the rain is going to slow. So this is just like a light rain that might be occurring. We can barely see it. I'm just going to do undo and leave that back at its default setting of about 4,000. The wind is something that's kind of nice because you can control the direction. Rain normally doesn't just fall straight down. We might want to have a little bit of an angle, so I'm just going to increase that so there's a little bit of an angle. We can add variation to the wind so that it's a little more random and mixed up. The spreader is going to control how close the rain is together. And then you can control the color of the rain. So if we go ahead and click on this and we make our rain a blue shade, you're going to see that depending on your background, it may or may not be as visible. For our purposes here, the darker blue isn't going to work. Of course, the opacity is way down. So if we turn this up, that could help, but it really doesn't look like that's doing much for us. So I'm going to go ahead and just set our rain back to white because that's going to show up the most. My rain is now easier to see, and that's because I've really upped the opacity considerably. I think I'll set this around 50. In regards to the background reflection, we're currently using lighten, and that's part of the reason that the blue didn't show up, but you can use the composite. And if we go ahead and set the composite, and let's just set this back to the darker blue color for a second, now you can see the blue rain would show up. But I think I prefer this how it was set originally with lighten and white. And then we have some extra settings that we can set here as well. But I think this is going to be fine. I don't even have to set any keyframes. You can see that the rain is just going to appear. Now we have rain falling. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple of puddles that are going to appear. We're going to really start to have those show up. Here the rain comes. It's going to rain for maybe a second, half a second or something like that. And then we'll go ahead and create a puddle. So to do the puddle, I think I'll actually create this in a separate composition because it'll be a little bit easier just to show you this. So I'm going to go into composition. We'll select new composition. And for this comp, we're just going to call this rain puddle. And I probably don't need my comp to be the full size because we're just going to make a puddle and have like a little bit of splashing water. I don't actually know what the size is going to be, so I'm just going to leave it at this size. And once we create our composition, then we can go ahead and we can crop the composition to be the appropriate size. I'm going to make the duration really short I'm just going to give this a duration of 10 frames, and I'll click OK to create that new composition. Here in our new composition, I'm going to start off by making an elliptical shape. So I'll select my ellipse tool, and let's go ahead and make the fill more of a blue watercolor. I'm going to simply draw a blue ellipse type shape on the bottom portion of my screen. And the position of this doesn't really matter so much, but I'm just going to center it. Then what I'll do is I'll name this layer, and we'll just call this puddle. I'm going to make sure that nothing is selected, and I'm going to use my pen tool, and we're going to draw an arched path that comes up from the puddle and curves to the right. So I'm just going to click, hold, and drag, and we'll just make kind of an arched type of path like this. I'm going to give this a light blue stroke, so I'm going to make the stroke really a light blue. And we're going to change the fill to none. And let's just zoom in on this area so we can really focus on what we're doing here. With our stroke selected, let's increase the stroke weight. I'm going to make this about 15. And let's actually make this a tiny bit darker blue just to make it a little bit easier to see. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open up this layer. And let's just name this layer Drop 1. We're going to go to Contents, Shape 1, and we have a lot of different options in here. So we're going to be modifying the stroke. I'm going to come into the stroke area, and I'll just give my timeline a little bit more real estate so we can work on this properly. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to change the line cap. So currently the line cap is set to a butt cap. That's the default setting, but we have the option to make a round cap, which is going to round the edges. So if we click away, you can see that now the line has a little bit more of a rounding on it. So we're going to be using the round cap, and we're going to go into the taper setting right here. So I'm going to open up the taper setting, and with the taper setting, we can go ahead and change the end length. If I change the end length, you'll see how this is going to make the shape taper, and we want to taper that down pretty much all the way, maybe not quite to 100. Let's leave it around 90 or so. This is just creating the line where it's really thin at the end and thick at the beginning. So it's starting to look a little bit more like a drop. The next step is we're going to go ahead and we're going to come up here to add. We're going to add another property. And what I want to do is I want to add my trim paths. So I'm going to add trim paths. And let's just collapse some of these other ones. I'll open up trim paths, and my keyframe is currently at frame 1. We're going to be animating end, so I'm going to turn on keyframing for end. Then I'll go ahead and specify the value is going to be 0, and you can see that the shape just completely is not even visible. We'll move the playback head out about 4 frames, so I'm just going to type 4. And then we're going to go ahead and change the end to 40%. Then I'm going to also be animating start. I'm going to turn on my start, and let's animate offset as well. So I'm creating keyframes at frame 4 for start and for offset. The values of these is going to be 0 right now. Then we'll move out to frame 8. We're going to change the start value to 40. We're going to go ahead and change our offset to a pretty high number. Like, let's just try maybe like 200, 220, something around there. We'll see what that looks like. If we scrub through the timeline, you can see here's this drop, and it's going to splash out of the puddle. If you can imagine, the rain is coming down, it's forming a puddle, and as the rain hits the water, we would have some little spraying droplets that would kind of come out of the puddle a little bit. I'm also going to make this appear a little bit more irregular. I'm going to do that by adding an effect, and we're going to add our roughen effect. I'll search for roughen edges. I'm going to apply this to the drop, and we're not going to animate this, but we're just going to go ahead and increase the border a little bit, and we can just make that be something like around 9 or 10. I'll just plug in 10. And if we were to turn this off, you can see that now my drop is very perfect, but with the roughen edges, it just makes it a little bit more irregular, which is probably a little bit more realistic. Maybe the border is a little high. Let's reduce that down to maybe 7. We just have a little bit of it in there. Then we're going to duplicate this drop. So I'm going to select this drop and we'll use Command D. This is going to create a new drop. This is going to be drop 2. We want to flip this drop so it's coming out from the other side, from the left side. I'm going to first of all use my pan behind tool, and let's just move our playback head back here to the beginning. With the pan behind tool, I need to kind of zoom out on my timeline because by default the anchor point is way up here. I need this to be moved down to the middle portion of the puddle. We'll go ahead and reposition that so that it's down here. And then I'm going to right click on drop 2, and from our contextual menu we're going to go to transform and we're going to use flip horizontal. That's going to flip this to the other side. Let's zoom in so you can see this a little bit better. And if we scrub through, you can see that we have 2 drops, and right now they're perfectly aligned and perfectly even, which we don't want. So with drop 2 selected, I'm going to twirl open the layer, and what we'll do here is we'll go into the contents. I'm going to go into shape 1. I'm going to go into stroke, and we had the stroke width of 15. Let's just maybe make this like 12. So this particular drop is going to be a little bit smaller. And then we're also going to just offset the drop slightly. So I'm going to select the drop. I'll grab the ending portion and just kind of drag it in. And then we'll just offset it maybe by like 2 frames. If we were to play the animation now, you can see how we have these drops and they're just kind of flying out of the puddle like so. That is kind of going to create the illusion that the rain is hitting, and then this is the splash that's coming up. And to solidify that a little bit more, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of a ripple to my puddle. I'm going to select my puddle layer. Once again, we're going to go ahead and duplicate this layer. I'll use my keyboard shortcut of Command or Control D, and we're going to go ahead and change some of the settings for this duplicated layer. So I'll select my selection tool. For the duplicated layer, we don't want to fill, so I'm going to go ahead and change my fill color to none. And then we're going to add a stroke, so I'm going to select my stroke, and we want to use this same color blue that we're using on our drops. So you can see there's the stroke right there. Let's go ahead and let's make the stroke a little bit thinner. I'll reduce this down to maybe 3 pixels. And let's go ahead and now add a little bit of animation on our stroke layer. I'm going to move my playback head back to the beginning. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn on keyframing for both scaling and property. If you hold down Option S, that'll open up scaling and automatically turn on the stopwatch for keyframing. And then I'm going to do Shift Option T, which is going to open up opacity and also turn on keyframing. And what we'll do here is we're going to go ahead and we're going to change our scale down quite a bit. Let's just make this like 5%. So this element's going to be super small. And for our opacity, we'll leave that at 100%. And then I'm going to scrub out to keyframe 8. We're going to increase the value of the scaling. Let's make that like 75%. And you can see this is kind of flying off. That's because I neglected to set my anchor point. I'm just going to do undo and just get back before I created any of the animation. I will zoom out once again to fit to 100%. I'm going to use the pan behind tool and just grab the anchor point and place it right in the middle of the puddle. And then let's try this whole thing again. So we'll turn on keyframing for scaling and opacity. Let's switch back to our move tool so we don't accidentally move the anchor point. I'm going to set my scaling down to 5. There we go. That's looking better already. I'll zoom in so I can kind of see what's going on. And let's leave the opacity at 100. I'll move the playback head out to 8. We'll increase the scaling to about 75. And then I'm going to reduce my opacity down to 0. If we play through the animation now, you're going to see that we have a little bit of a drop, and that just creates a subtle illusion of a ripple that would appear when the drops were hitting and then kind of spraying out of the puddle. I think I might just select puddle 2 and let's just lighten that color out just so it stands out a little bit more. We'll make it a super light white because I think that's going to look a little bit better. And then what we're going to want to do is we're just going to want to loop this. In order to do that, we're going to place this composition into our main composition, and we'll use an expression to create a loop. So here we are in our composition right here. I'll go ahead and decide where I want to have the rain puddle start to show. So this looks like a good spot. I'm going to go back to my project window. We're going to grab our rain puddle composition and bring it into our main composition. So I'm going to put this underneath my snail. And you can see that this is a super short animation. Remember that we only made it 10 frames long. I'm going to place it at the point in time where I want it to show up. And then we're going to grab this. And actually, this particular composition, we never cropped it. Let's just go do that because that'll make it a little bit easier to scale it and see it. We know that the composition doesn't need to be this big, so I'm just going to kind of scrub to where one of my drops is at its highest point, right around there, just so I know. We're going to set this region of interest. I'll just select the puddle and the drop, and then I'm going to go up to composition, and we're going to say crop comp to region of interest. So now this is going to make the region of interest the main spot. And it looks like these are really rough. Let me just select these really quick, and maybe we should adjust our roughen. For some reason I thought we didn't add very much roughening, but it looks a little crazy. Let's reduce this down to maybe just like 3. That seems a little bit better. And I'm going to do the same thing on drop 2. So we'll just go into effects, and we didn't keyframe this, so all we have to do is make a change. There we go. That looks a little bit better. If we go back into our Jumbrel composition, here is the drop, and I'm just going to go ahead and position this. So we'll just kind of put it on the ground. And what we want to have happen is we want to just repeat this, and we're going to have this scale up as the rain falls. In order to extend this layer out, we're going to use our time remapping, which we've looked at before. I'm just going to right click on the rain puddle pre-comp. I'm going to go to time, enable time remapping. It's going to set up our time remapping keyframes, which we've looked at before. I'm going to add an expression so that this just repeats. In order to open the expression editor, we're going to hold down our Option or Alt key and click on the stopwatch. And we're going to change what this says. We just want to create a loop. We're going to type loop out. The O in out is capitalized, and then we're going to open close parentheses. And this will force this animation to loop. In addition to setting the expression, I'm just going to extend the visibility of this out. And now you can see that this puddle is going to just continually do its little dropping thing. And then what we'll do is we'll add keyframing for scaling. I'm going to come to about a second and a half out. And with this particular composition layer selected, I'm going to hit S to open scaling. We'll set a keyframe. Then I'll move back to the beginning of this particular element, and we're just going to adjust the size of the puddle down. Because the anchor point is not in the center, it's going to scale from here. So let's use our pan behind tool. We'll move this anchor point to the center of the puddle. We can change our scale setting. We're going to probably have to adjust that at our last keyframe as well. But let's just set this to about 25. Let's just play that to make sure that we like it. So there's the puddle. We can see the drops. That's looking pretty good. And then let's just create a few more puddles. So once again, I'm going to select this layer, Command or Control D to duplicate it. I'll switch back to my selection tool, and we'll just move this over to another location. So maybe we'll move this over to the right. We'll maybe have the puddles be slightly different sizes, so this one might not get quite as big. We'll just scale one of these down a little bit. All right, let's play this part. So there's our clouds, rain comes in, starts raining, and then you can see the puddles are right there. So that is looking pretty good. Let's add a sound, and I have a thunderstorm sound, so I'm going to go ahead and drag this to my comp. I'm going to tap LL to open up the waveform. We don't actually want this to show up till right about here. And let's just play our animation. I think that my thunder is a little bit loud. I'm going to go ahead and open up the thunder waveform, and I'm just going to come to the audio levels, and I'll just reduce the decibels slightly, so maybe about 12. And if we preview this now, excellent. And you can see that this is starting to really come together.